Hello, my friends. It is day 259. We are reading Daniel chapter 10 through Daniel chapter 12. But before we get into our recap today, I want to thank you for taking a moment to check out this video. Hopefully, you're finding the yearly Bible reading program incredibly helpful and a tremendous blessing as you read the Bible every single day. If you have not yet accepted the invitation, please take a moment to check out the description box below. There you'll find the link that will take you directly to the YouVersion Bible app, where you can join a number of people reading the Bible every single day and leaving feedback on the things they're learning. And so we'd love for you to be a part of this community, and we look forward to you participating in the group. So today we are finishing the book of Daniel, and it has been a quick run through this book. It's hard to believe that this is a major prophet, but this is a major prophet for a number of reasons. It's got quite a few more chapters, a couple more chapters than your smaller books. But if you measure it in content, if you measure it in the span and the scope of prophecy, you understand that this is a very important book. Yesterday, we mentioned how chapters 7, 8, and 9 were critical to understanding how we get from the Old Testament to the New Testament. Today, we would say Daniel chapter 10, 11, 12 is key to understanding how these prophecies speak to distant futuristic circumstances. Most of the prophets that we've read so far tend to speak to the immediate moment. And therefore, when the apostles or the New Testament writers refer to them, they're referring to something that is a fulfillment of something that has been spoken, and not necessarily a manifestation of something that has been spoken. Daniel is different because whenever we read the book of Daniel and all of his prophecies, we see that, yes, he is definitely speaking to the moment that he is currently in. But what we also see is that he is speaking to future events that will happen at the end of the succession of empires that have been mentioned in this prophecy. So once again, as we saw in chapter 9, we see in chapter 10, that Persia in verse 20 and Greece are mentioned. And then when we begin to read in chapter 12, we see that there are references to the end. And what I want you to remember is that this idea of the end is not something that miraculously shows up in the New Testament. Neither is it Jesus's way of implementing a new idea, concept, or doctrine, but rather he's speaking to something that has already been mentioned. And for those who are familiar with the words of the prophets, even though it has been over 400 years or so before since they've actually maybe heard a prophet, if they were Bible students, if they knew their Bibles, this is why it's so important for us to read, because if we know our Bibles, whenever we hear the word of the Lord spoken in this time, we will be aware. We'll be aware of what the message means to us, and we'll be able to understand what the Lord is trying to speak to us or trying to say to us. So understand that the spoken word never contradicted the written word in any sequence of historical events. And as we educate ourselves on what the word of God has said, we'll understand what God is saying in the moments that we're in. So the end, it shows us as we look at chapter 12, verse 11, the references to 1,290 days and 1,335 days. It shows us that this is supposed to be intended to be a distant futuristic event that will unfold over time as Daniel has outlined it. And this is why the book ends by saying, as for you, go your way until the end. You will rest, and then at the end of the days, you will rise again to receive the inheritance set aside for you. You see that there is a sense of hope for resurrection. And that's how the book ends. Daniel literally ends this book, this prophecy, kind of just sitting there like, man, I didn't think it would go this way. But there seems to be some hope that God would grant a promise or an inheritance for those who are faithful, including those who lived during this time and those who would continue in the faith up until the time when Jesus comes. So very important details there. Chapter 11 was pretty interesting. I don't want to gloss past this because when we look at chapter 11, it's a pretty detailed account of how the Persian kings and the Greek kings will intersect. And we see a number of individuals, the south representing the Ptolemies, and we mentioned this on yesterday. The south mentioning referencing the Ptolemies, and then the north referencing the Seleucids. And so we have, as we saw earlier, four kingdoms. We have Thrace, Syria, Egypt, and Greece. So those are like your four kingdoms, as it were. And then you have basically two kingdoms that are going to just basically duke it out, right? We have a number of, figures. From Cleopatra to Antiochus the Great. It's just, chapter 11 is just so detailed. So what you want to do there is you want to look at the history of the Greek Empire. You want to take note of the war that basically happens at the demise of Alexander the Great, and then just trace that, history from his death, the way that the kingdom is divided, the war that goes on. Just trace that all the way to the coming of the Roman Empire, and then follow along chapter 11. You'll see Daniel is spot on. You'll see Daniel does not miss here. He prophesies that with such great specificity that it's hard to decline or deny that these words are, this message, should I say, is inspired. Now, there's a lot of ambiguity here. There's been a lot of conversations, scholarly research around the dates. And to be honest with you, there's not been a sure, concise, exact, date that has ever been prescribed, even though there's been, there has been some sort of estimations and projections, but it does not necessarily give us any kind of concrete, exact timing. But the point is that we're tracing a historical chronology, if you will, of maybe I should say even a prophetic chronology of events that are expected to happen over a number of years. And Daniel calls those things before they happen, and they happen, and so it shows the authenticity. It shows the reliability of what is happening. It shows that Daniel is speaking by the inspiration of God. And we have every reason to believe, based on how he has, specifically identified empires that would rise up. He has chronicled those empires, and they came, and they arrived, and they did exactly what he said they would do until the time Jesus arrives. So when you understand this backdrop, it is hard to separate the message of Jesus, the message of the kingdom, from government, politics, and rule, and earthly kingdoms, because Jesus' coming is a direct response to the kingdom's intention and attempt to rule God's creation in the direction that he doesn't want it to go. You cannot in any way preach the gospel without addressing the ambitious and the evil and the man-centered endeavors of earthly kingdoms, and how God's kingdom overthrows that, supersedes that, and victoriously gives the people of God the opportunity to live in the covenant blessings that he has prepared for his people. You can't really get around that. So anytime we have a gospel that does not address that, we're probably missing at least half of the message, and most of what the New Testament has to say about the gospel. So it's not just simply we got to get saved and go to heaven, but rather it is we got saved to do something on earth that counters the kingdoms of the world who are trying to hostilely take over God's creation to do things with it that he never wanted done. You see, that's the thing that's happening here. And unless you tie the Old Testament to the New Testament, you'll never get to see the beauty of that message. So in the times that we're living in now, it's very important that we connect ourselves with the Old Covenant, Old Testament message, the expectation. We align that with the gospel. We align that with the New Testament, and we allow the gospel to come to bear and address the matters in which we are commonly faced with on a day-to-day basis. We need that more now than we've ever needed it. So may the Lord help us with that. And may we get back to reading our Bibles, because that's the only way, brothers and sisters, we're going to get this thing right. All right. So friends, that's Daniel. That's why I love Daniel so much. You all know I've been itching to get here, and here we are. That quickly, we're done with it. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you're thinking. Leave your comments in the comment box below, and hopefully it'll stimulate some great conversation. Until next time, thank you for watching. Take care. God bless. And remember, live by the word.